Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Library of Congress. My name is Brent Iacobucci, and I am the acting director of the John W. Kluge Center, which brings scholars from across the humanities and social sciences to the library to work with our collections and to interact with each other, the policymaking community, and the public. We are immensely pleased to have Fritz Schwaller with us to present this year's Kislak Lecture on the life and career of Don Luis de Velasco the Younger. The J.I. Kislak collection of archaeology and history of the early Americas is composed of important archaeological artifacts, rare books, manuscripts, and maps, and geographic works of art, which survey the earliest history of the lands that would become known as the Americas. J.I. Kislak donated the collection to the library in 2014, and the collection items range from around 2000 BCE through the 21st century. The collection spans many languages, including English, Spanish, and German, and indigenous languages, including Nahuatl and Quiche. The Kislak Chair supports in-depth research projects in a range of disciplines, including archaeology, history, cartography, and linguistics, with a focus on the Western Hemisphere. By encouraging broad interdisciplinary inquiry, the Kislak Chair helps to nourish conversation ranging from the technical aspects of archaeological discovery to issues of interest in the current cultural conversation. The annually appointed chair also helps convene scholars invited by the chair for seminars, consultations, and ongoing study of the artifacts in the collection. For those of you online in the room, as you came in, you may have received a survey. If before you leave you could fill that out, please do so. It helps us maintain the quality of our programming. And now, about our speaker. Fritz Schwaller earned a BA in history from Grinnell College, an MA in Spanish and Portuguese from the University of Kansas, and a doctorate in colonial Latin American history from Indiana University. He is Professor Emeritus of History at the University at Albany and Research Adjunct in History at the University of Kansas. His work includes the history of secular clergy in early colonial Mexico, Nahuatl language manuscripts, the Catholic Church in Latin America, and studies on Mexican religion. Among many positions at various universities throughout his career, he served as president of the State University of New York at Potsdam. And I just learned today that he was also a news anchor at a radio station in Mexico City. He is executive director of the Association of Nahuatl Scholars, along with several past Kislak chairs, among many other professional connections. Fritz has written or edited 14 books and nearly 100 articles. And as I said, we are delighted to have him with us this afternoon. Please help me welcome Fritz.
Thank you very much. It's good to see you all here. I deeply appreciate your presence. As a scholar who focuses on the arrival of Europeans to the New World and their impact on native peoples, I need to acknowledge that this place has been inhabited by generations of people, most of whom are unknown to us. For millennia, they lived here, and we need to recognize that. I respect the long tradition of habitation here. Now, this research began over 40 years ago. I was working on another project that I never finished. And Don Luis de Velasco took over my life. It was one of those moments. Having been an academic administrator for over a quarter century, while I could engage in research, and I did write several books while I was a highfalutin academic administrator, I could not have the kind of sustained, in-depth research opportunity that this position has allowed me. And as a result, I want to thank the Kislak Foundation and the Kluge Center for this opportunity. I want to thank especially my two student interns, Abby Murray and Nico Sturla. And I also need to recognize that the Edward LaRocque Tinker Foundation was instrumental in the beginnings of the research for this project back in 1984 through 86. They supported me and my wife as we lived on 3 different continents. There are a lot of other people that I need to thank, but I will not belabor the point. Most of all, I need to thank my lovely wife. Thank you. And I need to thank my 2 sons, Rob and Will, especially since they've had to live with an older brother, Don Luis de Velasco, for all of their lives. In fact, well, both our sons have PhDs in history. Our older son, Rob, does pretty much what I do. He studies Mexico and the Caribbean in the 16th century. Will, our other son, has a PhD in art history and focuses on Argentina. In fact, my renewed energy for working on Valasco was prompted, not in small part, by our son Rob, who told me that I had to get this work done before I die, because he was not going to finish it. So, as we like to say, let's get her done. Okay. Let's see if I can manage this. There we go. This is his signature. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of documents with his signature on it. It has become as familiar to me as reading a letter from my father-in-law. I need to point out the Don. You notice it's part of his signature. In the 16th century, this was an essential marker of nobility. There were some nobles who did not have the Don, but the presence of the Don was a clear-cut indication that the person was a noble, and they would never, ever not use it. It was that important. And so I always refer to him as Don Luis, because that was his title. He comes from a branch of the minor nobility. Well, actually, he comes from a branch of the major nobility. His family is a little bit less so. He is very unique because he traveled, quite literally, over much of the known world. He made a trip from Spain to England to the Low Countries and then back to Spain. He made 3 round trips across the Atlantic. He made a trip from Spain to Florence and back, and then he also made the trip from Mexico to Peru and back. He was somewhat like the Forrest Gump of his age, in that he seemed to be at where it was happening at any particular moment during his life. Woody Allen made a movie about Zelig, who was always right there at that moment. Well, in a lot of ways, that's the way Valasco was. Now, this is where he was born. This is called the Casa del Águila. It's in a town called Carrión de los Condes in the province of Palencia, right across the street from the Church of Santa Maria la Blanca. The street that we're standing in here is the pilgrimage route to Compostela, in case you were interested. So all the pilgrims from France would walk along this street and recognize their house. He might have lived for part of his youth in Burgos as a member of the court of his relative, the constables of Castile, the Duques de Frias and the Condes de Haro. That's their series of titles. That's one guy. He's just got 3 titles. He might well have attended the University of Salamanca, which is quite odd because noblemen did not generally attend university in the 16th century. But we have a letter from his mom who indicates that he might have gone to Salamanca. His brother, Don Antonio, his older brother, was a member of the close circle of friends around Philip II, the man who would become Philip II, Prince Philip. His title was Gentil Hombre de la Boca, which means that he was present when Philip ate. As a result of that, when Philip got married, he went to England. And from everything that I have been able to find out, his little brother went along, perhaps as a courier to him, as an equerry to him. We know from letters within the family that he was there. And so he probably spent the 4 years or so in England and also in the Low Countries, which is where Philip was. So he got to go to Winchester and London and all of those fascinating places in the 1550s. We know that he was inducted into the Noble Order of Santiago in Brussels at the hand of Philip, who would very shortly become Philip II. He became Philip II about a year later. So this is still, he's king, I think, of Naples at this point. Philip is, that is. And this happens in around 1559. Then he goes to Spain, and within the year is in Mexico. Now, the reason he's in Mexico is because his daddy, also Don Luis de Velasco, just to make things confusing, is the viceroy of Mexico. And not only does our Don Luis go out, but his sister also comes along the next year. His father was viceroy, and if you look up at the crest, you might notice that that's the same eagle that was over the door of the house in Carrion. So we will keep this in the backs of our minds because this is an indicator of the family that we're dealing with. Now, at this point, I need to explain a word that I'm going to be using a lot for much of the remainder of this talk, and that is Creole. In our context, a Creole means something different than probably what you're thinking. For us and for these folks, a Creole is a Spaniard. Full stop. They happen to have been born in the New World. And so the circle of people that Don Luis de Velasco, our guy, is going to be rubbing shoulders with are, by and large, Creoles. So when I talk about a Creole, that's what I want you to remember, is that these guys are all Spaniards. They just happen to have been born in the New World. This is important because Don Luis de Velasco gets married, yay, in Mexico to a Creole. His wife, Doña María de Ircio, is the daughter of a conqueror and of the half-sister of the first viceroy of Mexico, Don Antonio de Mendoza. She was illegitimate. The mother, Doña María de Mendoza, was illegitimate and marries a conqueror. They have a child, Doña María de Ircio. She has a couple of sisters, and they also marry important Creoles. But in addition to that, Velasco's sister, Doña Ana de Castilla, marries Diego de Ibarra. Now, Diego de Ibarra is very important because he is potentially the richest man in Mexico. He is one of 4 men who discover the silver mines of Zacatecas. So he is extremely wealthy. He's also well connected because members of his family are part of the inner circle back in Madrid, some of the closest advisors to Philip. And his uncle, Don Francisco de Velasco, who also is a half-brother of Don Luis Sr., has already married a very wealthy Creole, Doña Beatriz de Andrada. And if you've got 10 minutes, I can tell you all about her because she's a fascinating character in her own right. Now, when he arrives in Mexico, before he gets married, he's living in the Viceregal Palace. And all of his best friends, all of his chums, because remember right now he's about 20, 21, are Creole elite. the son of the Adelantado of Florida, Don Tristan de Luna y Arellano, for those of you who know Florida history. Don Carlos de Luna y Arellano is living in the palace also. So there's this group of very elite local nobles who are living in the palace, and Valasco becomes chums with them. His father, however, is investigated by a special inspector who's sent out to Spain, from Spain, because they're worried that Velasco Sr. is cultivating too close of relationships with the local elite. And this is frowned on. This is not encouraged. The viceroy is supposed to be somewhat withdrawn, above the fray, and not engaged in personal relations with the people that he's governing. I will tell you from all the documentation, yeah, he did. He married his son to a local elite. He married his brother to a local elite. He married his daughter to a local elite. But before any findings can be made, before he's called on the carpet, he dies. So Don Luis Sr. dies, which leaves Don Luis Jr. and his sister living in Mexico. At about this same time, the son of Hernan Cortés, Don Martín Cortés, comes to Mexico to inherit his father's lands and powers. Now, what's interesting is that Velasco and Cortés just spent 4 years together in England. They were both part of this small group of Spanish nobles in the court of Philip II when he was married to Mary Tudor. Now, the local elite, the Creole elite, when Don Martín comes to town, are just over their heads. I mean, he's the son of the conqueror. And many of these folks have certain axes to grind against the royal government because they feel like the king has been cutting away their honors and their privileges. The king has been taking away some of the wealth and the power which they believe they earned in the conquest. And so they see in Don Martín Cortés an opportunity to regain some of that great wonder. Well, as it turns out, Don Martín Cortés is also eager to receive the adulation of other people. And so he acts very much the role of the great one of the town. Well, unfortunately, some of the Creole elite begin to do more than just talk. They actually begin to plan a potential coup against royal government. And this is perfect timing because the viceroy is dead. He just died. A new one hasn't come out. If we're going to have a coup, now's the time to do it. Unfortunately, loose lips sink ships, and these rumors reach the ears of various people, one of whom is Don Luis de Velasco, and he reports it to the royal authorities. The ringleaders are arrested and summarily executed. Cortés is put in chains, and they have a long court proceeding. In fact, some of the papers of the trial are here at the Library of Congress. It has been fun to read those. And so Cortés is sent to exile. He's kicked out of Mexico. The king is very thankful to Don Luis de Velasco for having turned in these malhechores, these bad people. And so he recognizes his service by giving him a seat on the Mexico City Council. He also receives a stipend of 10,000 ducats a year, which in technical terms, this is a shitload. This is about half the salary of the viceroy himself. So this is a significant amount of money. He also is given other grants and privileges. His father-in-law had been an encomendero, that is, he received tribute from native villages. He's guaranteed that revenue, and he's also guaranteed more revenue on top. So he becomes very quickly one of the wealthiest and most powerful citizens in Mexico. His brother-in-law is the miner of Zacatecas. He is a member of Santiago, has a seat on the city council, and a huge stipend. In 1572, he returns to Spain to resolve some family issues. But then he comes right back, and he returns in 1575 as a private citizen to Mexico. Now, I include this picture because this is more or less the view of the Valley of Mexico from the area where Valasco had his ranches, his rural estates, which is up in an area called Tultitlan. This is a painting from the 19th century, also a guy by the name of Valasco. I don't think related. In fact, I know not related. But anyhow, looking towards the southeast, there's the Valley of Mexico and the snow-capped volcanoes in the distance. So this is what it would have looked like. While he is in Mexico, he is a spy, if you will, for the king. The secretaries to the king have arranged for Velasco to write private letters to them telling about what's going on in Mexico. Now, every year they're getting hundreds of letters from local officials and from private citizens, whatnot, but he is sending private letters to the king reporting on what's going on. One of the big issues at this time are raiding nomadic natives called chichimecas. I won't go into the etymology of chichimeca, but anyhow, they're in the northern plateau of central Mexico, and their raids come further south into almost the Valley of Mexico. And this is a continuing problem. The viceroy at the time dies, and so the local High Court of Justice puts together an army to go fight these nomadic Indians. The person they put in charge of the army is Don Luis de Velasco. He doesn't want to go. He says, this is the nastiest, dirtiest assignment that I have ever had. I hope to come out of it with a modicum of honor. But he does come out of it with a modicum of honor. He also gets wounded. And so he comes back to Mexico after about a year in the field. He founds a little town called Totonilco up by San Miguel Allende. And he then proceeds to leave Mexico. He has to get explicit royal permission to leave Mexico. He has been sent on a job to Mexico to report to the king. In order to leave, he needs express royal permission, which he receives, and in 1585, after 10 years living in Mexico, this time, he goes back to Europe. And what does the king do? He makes him ambassador to Florence. Logical, as one does. But take a look at the date. Does anything else happen in 1588? Well, you may be aware that Philip II tried to invade England in that particular year. Now, ostensibly, Valasco is in Florence in order to negotiate a wedding for the Grand Duke. Here you have him, Ferdinando. Ferdinando, when he became Grand Duke, was not married for a very good reason. Up until a few hours ago, he was a cardinal. His brother died, and he became Grand Duke. Fortunately, he'd never entered holy orders, and so he could get married. So all of the crown houses of Europe were interested in landing him as a son-in-law. And so part of Velasco's ostensible mission was to get him to marry a Habsburg princess, either one of Philip's daughters or one of the Austrian daughters. He fails in that regard. His other job is to make certain that the Italian princelings pay the money that they had promised to help launch the Armada. And so some of his secret instructions are to talk to this prince and that duke and those counts and those guys to remind them of their love for Philip II and their deep faith in our Catholic religion, which is all code for, yeah. Okay. Now, when that is over, he goes back to Madrid, and what he finds out is that Mexico, that is New Spain, is potentially in open rebellion. There might be a civil war going on in Mexico. The man who went out as viceroy, he was the Marqués de Villamanrique, has thoroughly alienated everyone. They hate him. There are two governments in what is now Mexico, one high court based in Mexico City, the other high court based in what is Guadalajara, and they are always sniping at one another. Villamanrique throws gasoline on that fire and actually invades the territory of New Galicia, of Guadalajara. So all the letters that are coming back to Spain are saying, this is the worst, this is a mess, we've got to fix it now. And so what does the king do? He sends out Don Luis de Velasco as viceroy. Thank you very much. This is the first time that a viceroy would have come into office with that long of experience in the New World. He had been a resident of Mexico for some 30 years, you know, with a couple of exceptions, prior to his appointment. This is the Viceregal Palace where he lived in Mexico City. And if you take a look at his portrait, you will notice, I think, two things. One is the crest that we've already commented on. That's the Valasco family crest. I have a coaster with that on it. And what else do you notice about him? He's wearing glasses. According to some historians of ophthalmology, this is the first recorded instance of a person in the New World wearing glasses. They've even diagnosed him. He was nearsighted. He might have been cross-eyed. So, yes, he has glasses. You can't see it particularly well because of the lighting in the room, but if you look very closely on his left chest, right over his heart, you will see a red dagger. Well, that is the emblem of the Order of Santiago. He only wears black. He only has the red cross on his tunic. Because as a member of Santiago, he is required to wear that outfit. Now, what happens is that most members of Santiago, after they've been in the order for 2 or 3 years, get a special permission to wear silks and brocades and colors. He never did until he was 70. So until that, he was dressed in the black with the cross and the glasses. We'll talk a little bit more about the glasses in a minute. He actually had a relatively short term as viceroy. He was only there for 5 years. His dad had been viceroy for 15 years. His wife's great uncle, his wife's uncle had been viceroy for 14 years. He's only there for 5 years. He, however, does some truly remarkable things. He gets to go back up to the Chichimeca frontier. Villamanrique, for all of his sins, did at least figure out how to solve the Chichimeca problem, and this was by buying them out. Rather than fighting them, they just gave them food and clothing and let them settle in villages, and everything was hunky-dory. And so rather than spending tens of thousands of pesos every year fighting the Chichimeca, they spent a few thousand on giving them food and clothing, and it calmed down greatly. He also sent up natives from central Mexico to live in communities up in the northern frontier to serve as good examples for the natives. He looked into sweatshops. He tried to completely revise the mining industry. because his brother-in-law was the richest miner in Mexico. He knows a lot about the mining industry. And also the expeditions to New Mexico are begun at this time. And also we have close ties with the Philippines because all Philippine expeditions and all the wealth from the Philippines filters through Mexico. In 1595, he is then sent to Peru. Now, this is considered a promotion. You get more money in Peru. It is a hard place to get to. Now, this portrait is extremely important because this is the only portrait which I can guarantee was drawn by somebody who actually saw him. The other portraits might well have been done in the 18th or 19th century. This one was drawn by Felipe Guaman Poma de Ayala, an interpreter in the court in Lima. There's a fascinating set of articles in the Americas that came out recently talking about Felipe Guaman Poma. I urge you to read those. But anyhow, this was drawn by Felipe Guaman Poma de Ayala, and we know that he had seen Valasco. And so what do we see? The glasses. Yeah, he's got the glasses. He also has the dagger. As Viceroy of Peru, he has very much the same kinds of obligations as in Mexico, and so he does a lot of work on the mining industry. During his term as Viceroy, they have Dutch attacks up and down the coast, and so he has to send off a little navy to fight off the Dutch. They have continuing problems with their chichimecas. You have the Araucanos down in Peru, and you have the Chiriguanos in what is now Bolivia. And to a certain degree, Valasco applies some of his knowledge from Mexico to New Spain. There's one big difference about his government in Peru, and that is, just like all other viceroys before him, he's somebody who's come from outside. He's an outsider. When he's in Mexico, he's different. He knows them all. All of the leaders of the society, he grew up with them. He rubbed shoulders with them. He is related by marriage and other fictional ties to half of them. In Peru, he's just another colonial governor who's come in to deal with this. And so at one point, Valasco says, enough, I've had it. I've been serving your majesty since I was a young boy and went off to England with my big brother. Let me go home. I want to retire. And so the king said, fine, you can retire. You can go home. And so where does he go? He goes to Mexico. Mexico is his home. His children were born in Mexico. His grandchild was born in Mexico. His aunts were from Mexico. His sister and brother-in-law are in Mexico. His family is in Mexico. And so he goes home. Again, another picture of the Valley of Mexico by Valasco. Again, from the northwest corner of the valley, more or less where Valasco lived. And so he is a very happy private citizen who lives in Mexico and dandles his grandkids on his knee. Although, in fact, I think they're in Madrid right now, but we'll work on that. But guess what happens? The fellow who went from Mexico to Peru to replace him had the bad form of dying. So there's a vacancy in Peru. So you got, if you're the king, you've got a couple, three choices. Send Valasco back, take the viceroy of Mexico and send him, or send some third party all the way from Spain. What the king decides to do is say, wait, I can do this. Montes Claros, you're viceroy of Mexico. Okay, you're going to become viceroy of Peru. Now, what do I do about the viceroy of Mexico? Wait, I have a viceroy of Mexico. And where does he live? Mexico. And so for the only time that I'm aware in the history of colonial Latin America, a person becomes viceroy for the second time, unconnected terms. And so 1607 to 1611, he becomes viceroy of Mexico for the second time. This time he has to deal with flooding of the city. As you may know, Mexico City is built on an island in the middle of a lake, and it floods frequently. Well, this is when they bite the bullet and say, we've got to drain the lake. We've got to do something about the flooding. We also have a couple of revolts. We have runaway enslaved Africans on the coast who are causing problems. This is where the research of my older son and I intersect, because he studies the Maroons, that is, the enslaved people who have left for freedom. And perhaps something that most residents of Mexico City know about is that he creates a brand new park in Mexico City, which you see here, which is called the Alameda Central. And it is a distinctive feature of downtown Mexico City. On the left, you can see a painting from about the 1640s of what the Alameda looked like, and then you have a modern day photo from, I think, the top of the Latin American Tower. And he has a good time as viceroy. In recognition of his long and loyal service, this is not supposed to be here. I had moved it back and forth. Oops, sorry. I will go back. There we, no, I can't. How do we go back? Oh, wait, I know how I can go back. I can activate that. Okay, in recognition, he is made president of the Council of the Indies in 1611. In the Spanish colonial government, this is the one individual, reports directly to the king, who controls all of the overseas possessions. And so after a long and distinguished career, he gets to go to Madrid and serve at the king's pleasure. And here you have a picture of Philip III, who is the king when he becomes the president of the Council of the Indies. Before he goes to Spain, wait a minute, here we go. He is made the Marquis of the Salinas del Rio Pisuerga, which sounds a lot better in Spanish than in English. In English, he's the Marquis of the Salt Flats of the Pisuerga River. Somehow it's not quite as mellifluous. And his signature changes. He now becomes El Marqués de Salinas. And what do we see here? This is our noble crest. This is the Valasco crest that he has had, but it is now the crest of a marquis. At the same time, actually 3 years later, once he is in Spain, the king recognizes him again and bestows a second noble title. Come on. There we go. And that is Conde de Santiago Calimaya. Now, the Marqués de Salinas is based on their properties in Spain. The Condes de Santiago Calimaya is based on properties in Mexico. It is a unique title in that the first people to hold it are Velasco's daughter and grandson. They jointly are the first counts, which is very rare in Spanish noble history, I am told. And if you look closely in the upper right quadrant of the crest of the Condes de Santiago Calimaya, what do we see? Yes, we see the Valasco crest. This, as I said before, is based in Mexico. What's interesting is that I know the families who have inherited these titles, and they've been very generous to us in my research. And I know also the Mexican family that claims the titles, who actually has a much better claim than the Spaniards. And for those of you who are interested, and if you ever get up to New York City and go to the Brooklyn Museum of Art, they have a wonderful collection of colonial paintings. And when my wife and I were there, we turned a corner and damned if I didn't see that noble crest, because much of the wealth of the Condes de Santiago Calimaya, their paintings, their crockery, their porcelain, ended up in the Brooklyn Museum of Art. So, lo and behold, sic transit gloria mundi. And all good things must come to an end. And in 1617, Don Luis de Velasco dies in Madrid. His will is probated in Madrid, and he is buried in a lead-lined casket in the church of San Isidro, which is the Jesuit church in Madrid. And there's a detailed description of what the sarcophagus looks like, and even of some of the objects that are in it. There's one major problem. The building that you see here dates from 1625. So it was rebuilt shortly after his death, and they have no idea where he is. But we are assuming that he's still there. So this has been my quest for 45 years or so. There's still lots of holes to fill, but I want to thank you all very, very much for your attention. I've had a great time, and thanks to the Kislak Foundation. Yes.
Fritz, thank you so much for this. It was wildly entertaining in so many ways. I was particularly wondering is there anything that you can tell us about the kind of bureaucracy mechanisms for these secret letters? Like, how do they keep these secret letters separate from all the other correspondence? What is that system like? How does it actually work?
That's a great question. What happens is that, when people get angry, they sit down and they write a letter to the king. Dear king, I'm mad as hell. I'm not going to take it anymore. And so they, write it to the king, Madrid, exclamation point. His letters all go to private secretaries. So there are two private secretaries. One is Juan de Ibarra, and the other is Juan de Ledesma. Both Juan, go figure. Ibarra is a kinsman of some sort. I have not quite yet figured out exactly how they're related. He's closely related to Diego de Ibarra, Valasco's brother-in-law. They're from the same branch of the family. I don't know the details, but they correspond with one another as if they were close family. Whenever Valasco writes to Ibarra, he says, I kiss your hands and those of your lovely wife, Doña Catalina, and I wish the children growth and happiness in our Lord Jesus, and all that close kissy family sort of thing. With Ledesma, he's a little bit more restrained, but no, these are private letters to the secretary of the king, but they are intended for the king because he refers to the king as, as Su Majestad, as opposed to letters to the king, which is actually to the Council of the Indies, to Vuestra Majestad. So you can tell linguistically that there's something different going on here. The first one I got, I went, what? What's he doing that for? And then the penny dropped, and I figured it out. Even when he's viceroy, he's still writing private letters to the two secretaries. And those are some of the most fascinating things that I've uncovered in my research. When I started as a historian and I was interested in biography, one of my advisors told me, try and write a biography unless you have a lot of documentation from the individual. That was somehow more of a curse than a blessing, because there are hundreds, if not thousands of documents that Valasco signed over the course of his career. Obviously, as a viceroy, I mean, he was just signing stuff all day long. I have great sympathy with him, having been a college president and, you know, signing things all day long. I will tell you about my experience at the University of Montana over a drink. So, other questions?
Thank you for a wonderful talk. It's just a pleasure to be here listening to you. Forgive me if my area is the Andes, so I'm going to ask you, Velasco is following in the wake of Francisco de Toledo, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
yeah, we have Hurtado de Mendoza in there too. Toledo was very interested in restructuring aspects of Peru, the viceroyalty. Did Velasco have any innovative programs that he implemented? I know he well carried out what Toledo was doing, but in particular, especially up in the northern parts, in what is now Ecuador, with the Obrajes and some of the mining up there, or did he have any innovative projects that were particular to that area?
The most innovative have to do with the Obrajes. He reformed the Obrajes in Peru. He wrote the Ordenanzas para Obrajes that I think stayed on for quite a while. Toledo is really quite unique in Peruvian history, actually in pretty much all of Latin American history. At exactly the same moment, there were two viceroys who'd been in high-level meetings. Imagine a corporate retreat for viceroys. And this happened in Madrid, and you have these high nobles, and they're on a retreat with the king, and it's, how are we going to reform this? How are we going to make this system work? What are we going to do? Well, the two people that came out of that meeting were Don Martín de Enríquez, Don Martín Enríquez, who was Viceroy of Mexico, and Don Francisco de Toledo, who was Viceroy in Peru. So they sail out together. Toledo was much more aggressive, much more successful as well in instituting reforms in Peru, and I'm not exactly positive why. Enriquez had a lot more difficulty. Folks were just a bit more obstreperous. But when you look back, from 1590s, which is when Valasco begins, he is looking back not to his dad, but to Enriquez as kind of a model and a guide for where they're supposed to go. You also, one must recall that viceroys don't really operate in a vacuum. They've got a boss, and they know who pays the bills. Actually, they're paying the bills, but they know who their job depends on, and it's the king. So when the king says jump, you say how high. They receive a set of instructions, and that's what they are supposed to do. Velasco's number one, well, he has two instructions coming out. It's actually a 37-point letter, but anyhow, two overriding instructions. One is clean up the mess that VM Enrique did. We want peace and stability. We can't do anything without that. The other is money, as much as you can get, as quickly as you can get, because we have to recall that Valasco goes out to Mexico in 1589. Philip is going to go bankrupt in 1596. He has to pay the bill for the Invincible Armada. And so when Valasco goes out, other than cleaning up the mess, job one is money, 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 and then some more money. In 1591, the king sets out 11 new taxes that Valasco has to implement one way or another. So. And the same is largely true in Peru, because all those requirements are floating down to Peru as well. Other? Yes?
Could you, thank you.
You'll get a...
Thank you. So much color and drama and delightful ways that you tell the story. Could you say a little about, in all this colonial activity, the relationship between the nobility and the king and the Catholic hierarchy and their engagement in the colonial projects?
Thank you. That's what I wrote part of my dissertation on. I've been a historian of the church basically all my life. The church in the New World, if you're accustomed to Europe, it's very different. The king is the head of the church in the New World, period, full stop, do not pass go. The king appoints bishops. The king appoints high ecclesiastical officials. The king can appoint a parish priest if he wants to. The king's courts resolve disputes within the church. So let's say that the cathedral has an argument against the Inquisition. That goes to the king. Or if the cathedral's angry at the local municipal council, that goes to the king. So it's a very, very different kind of relationship. Initially, all of the bishops and certainly all of the upper clergy are from Spain. But by 1575, you have a university in Mexico for 39 years. And so you have a lot of trained jurists and canon law and everything else from Mexico, from Lima, and the other university cities. And so they, around 1575, begin to enter into the higher ranks of the clergy. And certainly by, essentially this time, by around 1590, towards the end of the 16th century, you start to have Creole bishops. That is a Spaniard born, trained in the New World, eventually becoming a bishop. So in social terms, they are completely intertwined. The governance is intertwined, the characters are intertwined. Valasco's third son becomes a Jesuit. His three youngest daughters all become nuns in Mexico City. It's just the way it is. The Creole elite populate the convents and monasteries of the New World. It really is an extension of their social reality. But I could go on for hours about that. The interesting thing about Valasco, one more point, is that his number one concern is about the natives. And he writes about the natives all the time, and how he really wants to improve conditions for the natives and this, that, and the other thing. But it's from an extremely paternalistic point of view, and also one which absolutely denigrates and denies agency to the natives themselves. So it's this bifurcated mentality that you continually, it just, sometimes it's hard to take. I mean, he was honestly sincere, but at the same time, he just could not see the agency and the ability within the native peoples over whom he was governing. So, yes. One more question? Okay.
Hi, Fritz.
Sir.
Very
How are you, Eric?
interesting. Came in a little bit late. We were in the other room, actually, so we
were afraid of that.
Wandered over here, so missed the first few minutes. Sorry about that. I have a question about the 1590s when Velasco is in Mexico and the relationship to the Philippines. And here, I mean, as I understand it, you have a silver boom going on in Mexico. Does silver then go to the Philippines and thus to China? Does Velasco manage that? How does that actually work? Because that seems really, really interesting, and you might have some special insights into that.
In a word, yes. Silver does get siphoned out of Mexico as part of the Manila trade because for the very simple reason that the Chinese and other traders in Manila place a higher value on silver than they do on gold. And so Mexican merchants are aware that the buying power of silver is greater than the supposed buying power of silver back in Mexico or over in Spain. So the traditional ratio is 16 to 1, 16 pounds of silver to a pound of gold. I don't know the number right off the top of my head, but in Manila it would be like 14 or 13. So silver is much more valuable vis-a-vis gold. And so obviously if you're a merchant, you can essentially sell silver for gold in this trade. And so that's why the trade is so very, very important. It's a difficult trade, takes almost a year to get there and then to come back another year, storms, whatnot. The governors of Philippines frequently don't make it alive. It's a tough place to put personnel. During Velasco's second term, he sends his first cousin once removed as interim governor of the Philippines to rule until the real governor comes out from Spain. This guy is very interesting. His name is Don Rodrigo de Vivero. He ultimately becomes the Conde del Valle de Orizaba. He owns a sugar mill in Orizaba in eastern Mexico. Anyhow, on his way back, he's shipwrecked and ends up in Japan for several months until they can get another ship, which is a tough place to be. But he gets out alive. This is after the martyrs of Nagasaki, but before the opening up with the shogunate in 14, as I remember. So it's kind of it's a dicey window, but he makes it out alive. And he actually writes an account of his time in Japan. And when James Clavell wrote Shogun, guess what one of the accounts that he used for Shogun was? Yes, Don Rodrigo de Vivero. No. So, yes, very intimate ties with the Philippines. So, are you going to give me the hook?
Thank you so much. Not giving the hook so much as letting you off the hook, perhaps. For those of you who are in the room, please join us for the reception. We can continue the conversation there. For those of you online, thank you for joining us.